So now we are in part 3 of the first Crusade series by Kings and Generals. This one called The Rise of the Seljuk Empire. So yeah.
We now have to talk about the catalyst behind many events, climate change. With the help of modern climatology, historians like Ronnie Ellenblum and Richard Bulliet were able to describe the extreme events occurring in this timeline. On one hand, the medieval warm period, spanning approximately from 950 to 1250, coupled with developments in iron smelting, led to a population boom in Europe, particularly in modern-day France, England and Germany, which could now access new fertile lands due to the adoption of horseshoes and the heavy plough. This population growth meant that many could join an armed pilgrimage under the right circumstances. On the other hand, the entire Middle East was destabilized by dry and extremely cold winters. Egypt, which was the breadbasket of the region for millennia, was barren after consecutive years of droughts, causing famine and pestilence across the Islamic world. As the cold set in, numerous steppe people migrated west, pillaging everything in their path to sustain themselves. The climate instability was mirrored by a political one, as the once mighty Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad was only a spiritual figurehead, a puppet under the control of the reigning Buyid dynasty. The Seljuks, a tribe within the Oghuz Turks, were an underdog faction that was cast out from one place to another, offering their military service in return for land. Despite embracing Sunni Islam, they were seen as a threat by the Ghaznavid Empire. After the Seljuk leader Tugril proclaimed himself ruler of Khorasan, the Ghaznavid Sultan Masud launched a campaign, taking the cities of Herat and Nishapur before making his way towards Merv. Along the way, his supply lines were harassed by hit-and-run tactics, and the vastly superior army, including 50,000 men and 12 elephants, was suddenly caught out in the desert with no fresh water. On May 23, 1040, the Battle of Dandanakan featured one of the biggest upsets in history, as a 16,000-strong lightly armoured force humiliated the Ghaznavid Sultan in front of his vizier, chief secretary and generals, who barely escaped.
Wow.
The Ghaznavids fell into decline and civil war, losing everything outside of a small holding in India, while the Seljuks rose to prominence. Tugril appointed his brother Chagri as governor of Khorasan, while he went on to conquer and vassalize most of modern-day Iran within the next 10 years. The two key factors that allowed a small band of renegades to build a massive empire were the military prowess and piety of Tugril and his followers, which attracted many Sunni followers. This rising tide was aimed towards the Shia people in Iran, and in particular the Fatimid Caliphate, but Tugril didn't fail to realize that in order to conquer Egypt, he would first need to defeat the decaying Eastern Roman Empire. As we showed previously, the Byzantines were barely holding on to the immense gains of Basil II, which included the newly formed theme of Iberia. Additionally, they had relatively friendly relations with the Fatimids, frequently sending gifts to each other, releasing prisoners, and administering the Church of the Holy Sepulchre since 1037. And so, in order to weaken the Romans, as well as secure the highly important grasslands of modern-day Azerbaijan, Tugril sent an invasion force in 1048, which was defeated, but followed up by a much larger one under the command of his half-brother Ibrahim Inal in September of the same year. The Byzantine army was a shadow of its former self, with many of the best soldiers sent west to deal with a rebel army. The governor of the newly conquered Ani wanted to launch a preemptive strike before the Seljuks could raid the countryside, but the governor of Vaspurakan, who also happened to be the son of the last Bulgarian Tsar, advised caution and to wait for the right moment. The commanders agreed to take the latter approach and to await reinforcements from the Georgian prince Liparit. The Seljuks raided the entire area between Trebizond and Tarin, but the main army was focused on the district of Basian, attacking the market town of Artsay, where the defenders were caught between a fire and the Turkish arrows. Thousands died or were enslaved as the town was ransacked and destroyed. As soon as the Georgian reinforcements arrived, the Byzantines formed up for battle at the plain near the fortress of Kapitron. Contemporary sources exaggerate the figures, and we have no clear number, but it was a massive battle in which the Seljuks had the numerical advantage. The Georgians formed the center, the governor of Vespuraken held the left, while the governor of Ani made up the right wing. The battle began in the evening and was mostly fought in the dark, with both Byzantine commanders defeating a disorganized Seljuk advance on the wings, but in the center, Ibrahim captured Liparit after his horse was shot with an arrow. He then withdrew to the east, while the Romans went back to their respective bases. This nocturnal battle was the first major engagement between these sides, and ended up with mixed results.
Yeah.
The Seljuks suffered in both men and reputation, but came back with many camels loaded with loot, and while the Byzantines repelled 2 invasions with very limited resources, the devastation on the region left a lasting impact on the economy. The Georgian leader was released after promising to never fight the Seljuks again, and an emissary was sent to Constantinople to demand tribute from the emperor. That request was denied, but Tughril was allowed to sponsor the restoration of the mosque in the capital. By 1050, one of the key Seljuk allies, the Kakiyid Emir Faramuz, rebelled, but he was swiftly defeated by the nomads who captured Isfahan, bringing the entirety of Persia under their control. Seeing where the wind was blowing, the puppet Abbasid Caliph invited Tughril to Baghdad to replace the Shia Buyid dynasty, which was done in 1055 under the pretext of a pilgrimage to Mecca. Despite their accumulating power, the Seljuk Empire relied on the loyalty of the most powerful family members as well as Persian bureaucrats, both of which were often fickle. Tughril's vizier, Al-Kanduri, constantly conspired against the Sultan in order to benefit his own cause, while Ibrahim, who felt like he was not getting enough credit for his raids, rebelled in 1058, but was unable to gather enough support and was strangled with a bowstring by his half-brother. Internally, the Seljuks were extremely divided and needed continuous military campaigns. So to feed this hunger, Tughril started sending annual raiding parties into Byzantium, starting with...
That's an interesting political thing. He's used the word nomads to describe the Seljuks throughout the series, I've noticed. And it seems to... I think what catches me most is the instability. Like, essentially, yeah, they're relying a lot on, you know, other forces here, but also they kind of need war in order to keep things distracted. Because there does seem to be instability with rebellions and just... So essentially war becomes sort of a distraction. And we've seen this before with like other rulers. I think even Timur needed to continually be on the march and stuff and continually doing things or else his army might cause issues. So yeah, it's almost kind of nomadic in a sense, huh? Always having to be on the move, always having to do something.
The sack of Melitini in 1058 while expanding into Armenia and the Levant. Both the Byzantines and the Fatimids were suffering from factionalism, the latter being ruled by Al-Mustansir Billah, who reigned from 1036 until 1094, one of the longest reigning and inept Muslim rulers. During his reign, power shifted from his mother to his viziers, while another group of Turks harassed the populace, already suffering from one of the worst famines in Egyptian history. The coastal cities in the Levant were mostly autonomous, and fell to the Seljuks in the 1060s in quick succession. In 1063, the Seljuk Sultan died after appointing his nephew Suleiman as his legal heir. In reality, Suleiman's elder brother, Alparslan, took up the mantle and marched on the capital of Ray, while Tughril's cousin, Kutalmish, who also wanted the throne, rushed from his base in Gurdka, reaching the city first. However, the vizier, Al-Kanduri, declared his support for Alparslan, which forced Kutalmish to besiege the city in November 1063. This delay proved critical, as it allowed for Arslan's army to arrive, forcing Kutalmish to lift the siege and engage his enemy, crushing the opponent's vanguard. Knowing that the remainder of the army was to the east, the pretender diverted the course of a creek to block their path, but eventually Alparslan made his way through the marshland and defeated his relative. In this flight, Kutalmish fell from a cliff, while his sons were taken as prisoners.
Dang.
Alparslan had big shoes to fill, so he immediately set out on a campaign against Armenia and Georgia, sacking the great city of Ani after a 25-day siege. It was at this time when the Eastern Roman Empire finally decided to focus on its eastern frontier under the leadership of the energetic Romanos IV. But the expert...
Yeah, we have covered this, so I know this video is meant to be more of a summary, though I am really interested, because again, the Seljuk Empire is something that I've heard of, but never have looked into on my own time, so forgive me for my more silence, is because this is all new to me, and I'm completely like I said, I don't know about these guys at all, other than what we were kind of aware of with the Sultan of Rum here, which came up in the Rise of the Ottoman Empire series, but the Seljuks themselves, like I said, I don't know about them, so that was just interesting seeing, you know, all that.
Leadership of Alparslan and nomadic tactics were no match for the slow-to-respond and divided empire. In 1071, after the Battle of Manzikert, Romanos was captured and then set free, which led to another civil war, while Alparslan turned to the east. The following events are described differently by the various sources, but in the end, this is the most likely sequence. After Alparslan surrounded and captured the Karakhanid Berzem fortress, its commander was brought before the Sultan and was tied to a stake for execution. He complained that he didn't wish to die in such a disgraceful way, so Alparslan ordered him to be untied and shot an arrow at him, missing his target for the first time in his life, according to the sources.
Wow.
The man then rushed at the Sultan, who rose from his throne but stumbled and fell. The desperate fortress owner grabbed his dagger and stabbed him several times before one of the servants killed him.
That sucks. Dude really was like... I'm surprised he even took the consideration. Like, he's like, alright, untie him. Then he loses, and then he gets jumped. He gets up and falls. It's almost... I'm sorry, the way he played it in my head, as I try to visualize it, just came across more comical, and that this dude got himself killed for no reason. What? I mean, granted, he didn't say he's dead, but like, still, he got himself wounded there for seemingly no reason. That sucks, dude. That sucks.
Alparslan suffered from his injuries for 4 days before he died, and he was succeeded by his son Malik Shah. This led to another period of internal instability, during which the rival tribes fought each other and began raiding independently, while the 4 sons of Katalmish managed to escape into Anatolia, led by the eldest brother Suleiman, who used shrewd diplomacy and brilliant military tactics to eventually create the Sultanate of Rum after he allied the Byzantines, who handed him several key fortresses in western Anatolia.
Yeah, and it kind of becomes its own thing. Yeah, that's interesting learning about the Seljuk Empire. It seems to have a lot of issues. At least from what Kings and Generals is highlighting, instability, a lot of power things. I mean, granted, that's things for a lot of empires, but it's so young, though. And everything's kind of like already showing a lot of cracks. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Malik Shah I began his reign by defeating his uncle, Kavert. He then turned his attention to the Karakhanids and Ghaznavids, who tried to capitalize on Alparslan's death, but both were soundly defeated. In 1076, the leader of the unruly Nawakiya Turkoman tribe captured Damascus and most of southern Syria, before being defeated at Cairo and appealing to Malik Shah I. His brother Tutush was sent to Damascus to relieve the Fatimid siege, which he did before entering the city, killing the Nawakiya leader, and establishing a base from which he conquered Sidon, Gibelka, Tiberias, Ramla, Jaffa, and most importantly, Jerusalem. Malik Shah I reigned during the peak of the Seljuk Empire, alongside his incredibly skilled vizier Nizam al-Mulk, whose policies during the rule of both Alparslan and his brother brought stability and prosperity to the state. Many schools and observatories were founded, acting as predecessors to the universities later created in Europe. acting as centers of learning and art.
Wow, that's interesting. It does seem like a lot of more eastward things influence things. Kind of like, I forgot, was it Khosrow or the guy who created chess essentially, and like also with like the Abbasid Caliphate and their, you know, empire, and just how like culturally, scientifically, mathematically, intellectually rather rich they were, and how that had an influence kind of more westward. It does seem like the east kind of in certain areas, yeah, it kind of like far outpaced the west, right? Like especially in like wealth and culture, and eventually kind of can serve as sort of predecessors to a lot of western things. That's kind of something I've thought of, so that's interesting.
Caravanserai were built on many important roads to support trade links, where food and accommodation was provided by the state. Taxation, administration and justice were centralized and executed by the most talented bureaucrats. After his death in a hunting expedition in 1092, the Seljuk Empire broke apart, similarly to how the Mongol Empire fragmented, with his 4 sons and numerous other tribes and local governors carving up a piece for themselves.
Again, it seems like the Seljuks, even despite that golden period, it seems like it was such a young empire, all things considered, and it seemed like it still never got over its fragmented, like, kind of, sort of... It seemed to have a lot of instability, essentially, right? They never had a fully unified, just solid few, you know, reigns and whatnot. It seemed like there was always instability, and the cracks were always shown. At least from kings and generals telling of this, you know? And, yeah, like, always kind of on the verge of just cracking, and here we are, right? Which is a shame, because, like I said, it showed a lot of promise there, but... yeah, it seems to have suffered a lot from that.
Tutush and Suleiman clashed in their desire to control Aleppo, both proclaiming themselves Sultan. At this point, our story syncs up, and we can turn back to Alexios Komnenos, who just managed to solve the Norman crisis, and now prepared a major expedition against nomadic Pechenegs and the local cities on the bank of the Danube River who supported them. This divide existed for over a decade, but what escalated the situation was Alexios' harsh treatment of the Polikian community in Philippopolis after they refused to aid him in his Norman campaigns. The 2 rebel groups and the Pechenegs allied and invaded Thrace in 1087, going as far as the suburbs of Constantinople. Rather than chasing nomads up and down, Alexios conceived a much grander plan. Within 40 days, Alexios and his key generals gathered a large army, which would make its way north, while a massive fleet shadowed its movement before entering the mouth of the Danube. At the War Council, one of the key generals, Nikephoros Phrynios, a blind former rival, had this to say about the plan. "Sir, if you cross the Haemus Mountains, you will appreciate the fastest horses." When another council member asked him to elaborate, he simply added, "For the flight."
I like he's just there. After he rebelled and, like, tried to I know that amnesty was a big part of Alexios's and his mom's thing. Being more forgiving, less purges, I get that, but I just find it funny. And obviously, he mentioned last video, he was still kind of given reign over his area. But I just kind of it's a funny image, right? This dude who, like, rebelled and, like, was trying to take it all is just sitting there now blind, like a former enemy, and just, like, now giving his thoughts and stuff. I don't know. It's kind of like a funny, like, image in my head. But, yeah.
Despite the warning and centuries of experience fighting the Bulgarians in the region, Alexios marched on directly at the city of Dresda in order to cut off the Pechenegs from the supplies they needed to survive. Envoys were sent to discuss peace terms, but Alexios bet too much on this campaign to walk home with a simple treaty, so he arrested them.
I think Alexios... I mean, I'm getting the vibe that this might not go well. I mean, I don't know, obviously, but, Alexios has kind of been a politics guy. Not to say, like, his last battle, he proved to be very shrewd in terms of battle. So it's not like he's, like, you know, a chump in terms of that. But I think him throwing away a potential negotiation probably isn't a good sign. And I'm getting the vibes that he might not go well, especially this plan. Like, he's putting too much stock in it. He won't back down and just take anything else except, I guess, his plan being fulfilled. So even the warning from, you know, he's ignoring. And I'm getting a bad vibe from this.
Now enraged nomads employed hit-and-run tactics on the Byzantine foragers and the army camp. Still, Alexios managed to reach the trade city and take it, with the exception of its 2 citadels, the defenders of which held out. Not wanting to be caught in between a siege and a nomadic army, Alexios ordered a withdrawal and sought out the Pechenegs in open combat, as he was well aware that he could not sustain his army for long. It didn't take long before the horse riders were spotted, and Alexios manned the center, while the wings were commanded by his brother Adrianos and Nikephoros Melesinos. Alexios ordered his infantry to hold their formation under any circumstances, while the Pechenegs formed up with their wagons forming a circle behind them. The 2 sides clashed and fought for an extended amount of time, with the nomads constantly evading the Romans as they fired arrows from horseback, both suffering heavy casualties until another group appeared on the horizon, forcing the imperial army to flee. The son of Romanos died in combat, while Alexios himself was struck by a spear in the buttocks. In their rout, the Byzantines had to abandon the Shroud of the Virgin Mary by hiding it in some bushes after it was brought on campaign to boost the morale of the soldiers.
Yeah, that sucks. Dude literally got shot in the butt. Talk about running with, like, you know, your tail between your legs, right? But yeah, again, Alexios was seen a bit too stubborn and having it his way there. And I think that wasn't a good sign.
Broken, scattered, and chased down by the nomads, many soldiers were lost in the woods for weeks before finding their way back home. However, shortly after the battle, another nomadic group, the Cumans, who were called upon by the Pechenegs to aid them, arrived after the battle was done. Regardless, they demanded their share of the plunder, while the Pechenegs argued that the spoils should go to the many injured warriors. The argument spiraled out of control, and the 2 sides clashed, with the Cumans winning over all of the spoils and chasing the Pechenegs down. In the next 3 years, Alexios changed his strategy, taking control over small bands of units defending against raids and tracking down nomads. In one instance, we're told of Alexios suspending wagons over the walls of a city and dropping them down on the unsuspecting raiders below, causing confusion. Balkan peasants were recruited as infantry, while Turkic and Latin riders were hired as mercenaries. Meanwhile, a new threat arose from Anatolia in the form of a renegade Seljuk pirate.
Okay, so Alexios adapting his strategy. Instead of just big, overglorious campaigns, kind of like these little hits and whatnot, you gotta adapt, right?
Cheka, who was theoretically part of the Sultanate of Rum, built a fleet from his base in Smyrna in 1088 and began raiding and capturing Aegean islands, including Lesbos, Samos, Chios, and Rhodes. He also reached out and coordinated his attacks with the 2 rebel governors of Crete and Cyprus, who were unhappy with the taxing policies of Alexios. After hearing of the Battle of Drastar, Cheka also managed to send messages to the Pechenegs, convincing them to launch a new major offensive against Constantinople, while he distracted Alexios with his navy. As a response, Alexios reached out to the Cumans and won them over to his side by promising them all of the captives and loot from any battle against their now common enemy. In 1091, the Pechenegs raided Thrace again, and the Romans met the Cumans at Livonian. The combined army assembled against the incoming Pechenegs, and Alexios sent the imperial standard-bearers to the Cuman side, which made up the right wing, ensuring that they would not betray him in the middle of the battle. On the left
Yeah, smart.
wing, Seljuk and Latin knights pursued the confused Pechenegs, who were sustaining heavy arrow fire and had nowhere to run, as their wagons were positioned behind them. The trap was set, and now the imperial infantry pressed forward and began slaughtering the nomads who had
Dang, completely trapped them. Holy crap. I'm telling you, Alexios, like, I knew about his, like, his political diplomatic mind, but seeing his like military skill on display, the guy's even cunning in that, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm very impressed by him.
Also brought their wives and children. Alexios capitalized on this overwhelming victory, ordering servants to bring wineskins full of water to his troops, refreshing them and ensuring they finished the job. The carnage was so severe that it led to a saying referencing the date of the 29th of April 1091, all because of one day the Siths never saw the month of May.
Wow.
In reality, a few managed to escape, while others were taken captive and settled near Thessaloniki to serve in the army. But either way, they will never play a significant role in history again. So far, we have covered the first
Complete domination, my friends. That was awesome. And yeah, this will be the end of part 3, and tomorrow we'll get to the actual beginning of the Crusade, so I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.